Ashland Citizens Budget Committee to order. I would like to begin by offering the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and honor the Aboriginal people on whose ancestral homelands we work, the Ikirikutsum Band of the Shasta Nation, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We honor the first stewards in the Rogue Valley and the lands we love and depend on, tribes with ancestral lands in and surrounding the geography of the Ashland watershed include the original. I call this June 16th, 2025 meeting of the Ashland Citizens Budget Committee to order. I would like to begin by offering the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and I
guess there's a delay. Somebody swear.
Okay. I'll continue. We honor the first stewards in the Rogue Valley and the lands we love and depend on, tribes with ancestral lands in and surrounding the geography of the Ashland watershed include the original, past, present, and future indigenous inhabitants of the Shasta, Takelma, and Athabascan people. We also recognize and acknowledge the Shasta village of Quakaka, where the crow lights, that is now the Ashland City Plaza. Roll call for the record, please.
Mayor Graham.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Duquesne. Bloom.
Here.
Dale.
Here.
Kaplan.
Here.
Hunter. Adams.
Here.
Roy. Fredericks.
Here.
Murray. Spiegler.
Here.
Wade.
Here.
Cheryl.
Here.
Are there any corrections to the Citizens Budget Committee meeting minutes of May 7th, 2025, besides those made before this meeting?
Yes, I have a correction. In all places where Meg Wade is referred to as she, her, it should be Meg Wade, they, them, as needed in all of the sentences.
Are there any other corrections to the minutes of May 7th? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the May 7th, 2025 minutes of the Ashland Citizens Budget Committee?
So moved.
And a second, please? Second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Graham.
Yes.
Hunter. Dale.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Fredericks.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Duquesne. Murray. Spiegler.
Yes.
Kaplan.
Yes.
Wade.
Yes.
Roy. And I'm sorry, is Councilor Cheryl?
Abstain. Point of order.
Motion passes.
I'll vote yes, too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Are there any corrections to the Citizens Budget Committee meeting minutes of May 14th, 2025, besides those made before this meeting? Okay.
Yep. Same correction in all those places where she, her is used for Meg Wade, they, them should be used instead.
You should have.
I make that as a movement if that's needed.
Yes. Can I have a motion to approve the May 14th, 2025 minutes as amended of the meeting of the Ashland Citizens Budget Committee?
Second.
So moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Bloom.
Yes.
Graham.
Yes.
Hunter. Dale.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Fredericks.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Duquesne. Murray. Spiegler.
Yes.
Kaplan.
Yes.
Wade.
Yes.
Roy. And Cheryl. Motion
Any other
passes.
comments from the committee? I want to let everyone know that the budget process resources can easily be found on the city website, and I want to send thanks to the finance department and all of city staff for their diligence in presenting this budget to us. See you again for an update in a year's time. Meeting adjourned.
I call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the June 16th, 2025 study session of your Ashland City Council. Before we get started, I want to welcome our newest city councilor, Derek Sherrill. Welcome to the dais, Derek. Good to have you here. And we have two items on our agenda this evening. The first is the Ashland Police Department annual report. The second is the strategic planning process and next steps. Sabrina?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have Chief O'Mara here to give an update about the police department. Police department has been doing this since 2008, so he will go over use of force, crime, clearance rates, and give an update on the Ely area, as well as some recent statistical information. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. Ty O'Mara, Police Chief. As noted, this is my annual appearance to bring several specific items that we track over the years. This is an ever-increasing list, so if modifications are wanted, I'll take notes and do my best to bring that information back in the future. As you'll see in the packet there, on the surface appears to be a huge, significant spike in use of force incidents, up from 11 to 43, and there are several things impacting this, as I noted in the report. One of the most significant things was that we were not capturing certain data previous to this report that we should have been capturing, like the display but not use of firearms and such. And so we're trying to capture more data to more accurately reflect contentious interactions between members of the Ashland Police Department and members of the community. We also had for a long time a staffing shortage, which probably affected proactive policing. You will also note that lodgings at the Jackson County Jail were up in 2024. So all of these things are going to lend themselves to more incidents of use of force, the increased data capturing, the increased staffing, the increase in lodging. So I would certainly want this to be something that I and everybody else keep an eye on in the coming years, but I'm not really alarmed by this jump from 11 to 43. The taser was actually used and deployed a few times, used and not deployed 9 times. OC, the pepper spray, was used once, and the rest of them were fairly low-level empty hand techniques. 100% of the incidents involved a suspect who was identified as being white, and off the top of my head, I think it was 30 of the suspects were identified as male and 13 as female. Any questions on use of force? Yes.
Counselor Hanson?
I'm curious, are you going to use the slides in the packet?
I'm sorry. I am.
Okay.
Can we get them up there? Yeah, thank you, Counselor. All right. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. And please do stop me if anything comes up. I'm trying to get through this, but not too quickly. One of the other things that we bring to council every year is what the FBI used to call Part 1 crimes. And while that's not the current vernacular, I still call them that just so we can have some continuity throughout the years. The set of crimes that used to be Part 1 crimes are homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, auto theft, arson, and larceny. Now this is all captured under the National Incident-Based Reporting System. One of the things that you're going to see tomorrow, and maybe you've seen this in my council communication already, the data management system that everybody except the state police relies on in Jackson County is operated by the Medford Police Department, and it's imperfect. And I included the Medford Police Department City Council communication with your packet so that you could see the Medford Police who own this system recognizing that their data capture techniques are not as good as they can be. So all of this is a general picture that's being painted. I'm not going to say that these numbers are 100% accurate, but that's what collectively we are working toward. And when you have that contract in front of you tomorrow, that's a piece of it per the Medford Police Council communication. Anyway, in 2024, we saw a slight uptick of 387 Part 1 crimes, up a little bit from 342 the year before. And we also saw that violent crime, which is homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, that there were 40, up from 29 in 2023. I am very proud that our clearance rates for violent crime remain very high at 80%, when the national average is closer to about 42, 43%. So I think that's something that we can all be proud of. And if anybody is curious, you can look in the packet and see the web address for the data repository with the Oregon State Police that we pull a lot of this information from. Any questions on crime rates? Okay, moving on. The enhanced law enforcement area, as you know, has been around since 2012, and the additional CAP East, which is roughly the Ashland Street Business Corridor, has been around since January of this year. The ELEA allows us, or an ELEA allows us to petition the judge for an expulsion order for a person's chronic negative behavior. This is something that's new to the Ashland Street Business Corridor, and of course that's an entirely different conversation, but we do have the 2 ELEs in place right now. For years, we've captured data on the ELEA downtown that just generally paints a picture of quality of life issues downtown. This is not officer initiated, but community member initiated calls for service into dispatch for crimes or complaints such as disorderly conduct and assault, unnecessary noise, drinking in public. The data displayed up here is the data that I've presented before, and it shows a steady to slightly continuing decrease for the CAP West, which is downtown. And again, and I know that this is a bigger conversation down the line, but this is the exact same data tracked since 2017 for CAP East. And in 2024, we saw 104 ELEA violation convictions in the municipal court, so that would have been exclusively downtown, and 8 people were expelled from the downtown area. I believe it continues to be a good tool, and I mostly look forward to coming back and talking to you about it again in August. But any questions on the ELEA?
Counselor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. And Ty, this may just be a very, very nitpicky clerical technical, but this is calls for service as well for CAP East, correct?
This is calls for service for Cap East, which is the Ashland Street Business Corridor, not, this is exclusively Cap East.
Correct.
And this is exclusively downtown.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, the statistical transparency of policing for years, a few years now, the Oregon legislature has mandated that all police officers in Oregon capture the perceived demographic data for officer-initiated stops. Among the data captured is the person's perceived ethnicity, their perceived gender, what enforcement action was taken, and this is available publicly. The data that was captured from July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024, and reported is above. It shows demographic data that is generally in line with Ashland's demographic data, especially when you consider that Ashland is on the I-5 business corridor, is a university school, is a tourist destination. And one other key factor in that I think is important to remember is that this officer-based perceived ethnic identity does not allow for identifying somebody as multiracial. But if somebody is self-reporting through the US Census or through some other demographic data collecting, that is included. And so there is I think 2 to 4% of the city of Ashland that self-identifies as multiracial. That has to be included in here somehow. And so I'm comfortable saying that these numbers are consistent with Ashland demographics. And there's, of course, never going to be a one-for-one matchup because data sources can't even agree with each other. Any questions on stop data? All right, we've started to include calls for service in parks, and you'll see from this graph that calls for service are down a little bit, and I didn't include it in the pack or in the PowerPoint because it would have been too busy, but I did include in the packet the same information that I included last year for 4 of the most popular parks, those being Lithia, Triangle, Clay Street, and Garfield, and I'm happy to talk about that. One of the requests that had been made by council last year was that the ordinance calls for service in each park be broken down, and so that's what's represented here. Each of these groups would fall under the line item ordinance, ORD, in this information. So I've presented that. Looking at Garfield Park, 2024 and 2025, the most common ordinance complaint is camping, and then there's storing property, which is affiliated with camping, bus camping. Same thing in Lithia Park. I would highlight that that is not necessarily the most common call for service type. That is just within the ordinance subset, but it could be that the ordinance umbrella was the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 2nd, whatever, most common for the park for the year. So that hopefully gives council some answers about what the ordinance breakdown looks like in each park over the years. And again, the deeper dive info is attached to the council packet, if there's any questions about that.
Councilor Kaplan?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Ty. Just looking at, I mean, it's hard to really draw any kind of patterns from these data, at least for me. But one thing that does jump out is on the camping, which you said is the most common, most frequent. You see a dramatic drop in 3 of the 4 parks in 2024 versus 2023 and earlier, except for Lithia Park, where it's pretty constant. The anti-camping ordinance, well, our night lawn started in 2023. Is that what you attribute that drop to, or what do you attribute the drop to?
I certainly think that that's part of it. Once we started giving people a place where they had permission to camp overnight, I think that that, by definition, allows us to see a drop in that behavior in other parts of the city.
And it looks like 2025 is continuing the downward trend. I mean, it's a partial year, it's hard to know, but
yeah, I look forward to seeing what the full numbers look like.
Okay, thanks.
And that's all the info I have, but I'm happy to go back and try to dive deeper into any slides if anybody has any particular questions.
Councillor Hanson?
Thank you, Ty. This is all really good information. And in all silliness, there's one column in Lithia Park that says bouncy house. And I
You
thought,
weren't aware that we had a bouncy house ordinance in?
now we have a bouncy house incident on record. But no, I appreciate this data and I thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And on that note, this information was derived from the crime analyst going in and looking at notes and seeing what the nature of the ordinance complaint was. And so there's bouncy house. And then if you look, same line, you look over to 2024, you see panhandling. And of course, there's no such thing as a anti-panhandling law in Oregon. So this was just Amanda pulling out comments from the CAD and trying to throw a label on it.
Noted. Thank you.
Councillor Bloom?
Thank you. Yeah, it's illuminating and certainly changes my plans for having a bouncy house in the park for my birthday. So thank you for showing that to us. No, I was curious if you could speak a little bit to the relationship with Jackson County's mental health mobile crisis response team. I don't know, is it still in a pilot phase, and are there plans to expand that and have more of a active presence in Ashland?
To my knowledge, the mobile crisis response team is still in a pilot phase, which again, to my knowledge, has it available basically banker's hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And we have leaned on that program. I would like to see us lean on that program more. I, like all of you, I'm sure was dismayed to hear that the Cahoots Grand program up in Eugene had been discontinued. I hope that that's old information, but I think it has. I'd like to see Jackson County Mental Health expand their crisis response team. I'm not aware of any plans for expansion, but we will continue to push that button and use that partnership as we can.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. And I certainly, I'm curious what everybody else's thoughts are, but I certainly would be interested in, maybe kickstarting a more concrete conversation on what it would take from the county. Is there something that Ashland can do to help facilitate that so that we could be beyond banker's hours? That would be ideal.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in that the Public Safety Coordinating Council is doing a mapping exercise of the different services that are available to people, and it includes what, the law enforcement intersection with those services as part of a bigger conversation that's already happening in the county. And I think we're heavily involved with that. The chief and I both are. So I think that conversation is underway. They're trying to figure it out. So Ashland's involved with it at this point. But I think we're looking always for those places where we can help figure out how to move it about in a faster way. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chief. I really appreciate this. This is, as always, very comprehensive and wonderful. I do want to, first a statement, just thank you to you and the team. I know it's it's an art to combine compassionate law enforcement, and you and your officers thread that needle with grace, and appreciate it. It's not easy. So thank you for that, really. The second thing is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head that this council may need to know to help you and the staff assist you in any way?
I can't think of anything. I am grateful for council's support in continuing to fund the increased staffing. We are at better staffing levels now than we have been in a number of years, and I'm happy to say that I've only got 2 open spots, and I haven't been able to say that in a long time. So thank you for the continued support, and I will certainly come to council if I can think of anything that I need to lean on you for.
Thanks, Chief.
Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, my question is very similar actually to Councillor Dale's, maybe a little bit more specific. I'm wondering, Ty, as you've now done this for quite a few years, you've seen the numbers, for what they are. What is your takeaway on these different areas, all these data on these areas, just in terms of adequacy of resources, of training, of the quality of engagement that our police have with our visitors and residents? Is there any takeaway message that you can share with us?
I have a very mostly subjective, but there's some objectivity in it as well, that I do think that the officers do a really good job of engaging with all members of the community at all levels. I don't know of a way to quantify that other than perhaps to look at the Spider Tech customer feedback platform that we use, which is overwhelmingly positive. Maybe that's something I should include in this next year. Okay.
I don't know what that is. If you
So Spider Tech is let me start off from a different angle. Over 90% of calls to dispatch are initiated by a cell phone. So right now, if you initiate a call for service for the Ashland Police, the Medford Police, maybe Central Point, and definitely County, I think, that triggers a customer feedback loop that, just like if you call an Uber and say, I want to go from here to Medford, it gives you updates. The Uber or the Lyft app does. This does the same thing. Says, Officer O'Mara is on his way. His ETA is 10 minutes. Sorry, Officer O'Mara was delayed. It gives you your call for service number, your case number, and then at the end of everything, it gives you a link to immediately give feedback and answer a bunch of questions that get into some demographic questions as well, if you choose to give up that information. And that we've been using that for, I think, over a year now, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. And of course, we're never going to have everybody happy, and we're never going to get everything right, but that gives us a really good snapshot of how the community feels the Ashland Police are engaging with us. Another example, and since this did start off as the use of force report, this is a really good example that kind of captures that. We had 2 officers who were given awards for valor by Axon, which is the company that produces a bunch of police equipment, but in this case, the conducted energy weapons or the tasers. And this is stemming from an accident or an incident that happened, I think, back in October, November of last year, where somebody in crisis shot his mother non-fatally. The officers responded. He took a couple of shots at the officers, Ashland officers. He came running out of his house with his hand concealed, saying, "Shoot me, shoot me." And the officers did an excellent job of engaging him in the most appropriate way. They subdued him with a taser, when in many, many other jurisdictions in the United States, he would have been shot and killed. Mm-hmm. And they were rightfully awarded with a life-saving medal or medal for valor from Axon. So I certainly hope that all critical incidents go that way and not the way of having to use lethal force. But that's an example under the use of force umbrella that I think really gives us a picture that Ashland Police are trying to serve everybody well, even if it's the perceived bad guy in a critical situation.
Yeah, thanks, Ty.
And I'll make a note to bring the Spider Tech information back next year.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see what the feedback looks like. We have a couple of people who have signed up to speak this evening. So we have Debbie Nicewander and Alex Soul. Each of you will have 3 minutes. You'll speak at the podium over to my right. You'll have a timer. The timer is also on the clock, but it will tell you as you start to get lower in your time, so that when you see it turn to yellow, it means your time is getting less. When it is red, it's up. You'll also get a chime at 20 seconds. So the first time you hear the chime, you can keep talking. When you hear it the second time, that's when it's time to wrap it up. So go ahead and tell us your name and the city in which you reside.
Is it on?
It is.
Okay. My name is Debbie Nicewander. I live here in Ashland, and
Oh, Debbie, can you pull that microphone around towards you? There you go.
I just don't like looking at the clock.
Okay.
Can we start over?
Yes, yeah, you can stay turned sideways a little bit there so you don't have to look at it.
Okay. Debbie Nicewander, Ashland, Oregon. I wasn't prepared for tonight. I didn't know we were doing the annual report, so I just kind of threw something together. I'll have supporting documentation tomorrow night. So as far as prohibited camping, that's about as far as I go. On the night lawn, we have a total of 64 prohibited camping citations. And in the Ashland area, we had a total of 59. As far as the prohibited camping night lawn goes, there were 33 citations, violations that our blotter report doesn't give information on. 14 of those were ordinance violation, that's a class. 12 were ASSTAP, that's assisting Ashland Police, I believe. 3 were all other offenses, and 3 were ASSTPP. I think some of those are from our cadets. But anyway, those totaled to 33. So if you take the 64 and the 33, that gives us 97 potential camping violations on the night lawn to the 59 in town. In 2023, there were 80 prohibited camping violations. This year, 157. The number has doubled. It's just not in the parks. It's all right here. This is our legal space. And a lot of the houseless see it as entrapment because they're all getting cited. I'll bring data on that. As far as the parks and Garfield Park, I'm kind of surprised nobody questioned no notes in CAD. Don't you want to know what those citations were for? I do. But anyway, in 2024 under Garfield Park, 2 of those were prohibited occupancy. Oh gosh, the one report I was able to finish was, I don't know, lack of quality to life. Okay, so in 2024, we had 20 overdoses in Ashland. I can't confirm how many were fatalities and how many were Narcan. We had 34 suicides and or suicide attempts. We had 33 sudden deaths with no supporting documentation, and we had 5 psych holds. So that just shows to me that, you know, a lot of us, we're living in 2 separate worlds, and we need to bring us, divide all together. It's not a good thing. And then as far as the report and arrest log, the weekly report and arrest log, the last one came out on May 19th. It's supposed to come out weekly. We're 4 weeks behind. And for the monthly archived reports, we still haven't had May of 2025 come out yet. So we're falling behind in our reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Soul.
Give me 1 second, please. Good evening, Mayor, Councilman, and Chief O'Mara. My name is Alex Soul. First of all, I want to thank Chief O'Mara and the Ashland Police Department for the professionalism and the time that goes into making a presentation like this and a report. I have deep respect for our Ashland police officers who serve this city and the pressures that they have to navigate every day. That said, I am here tonight to speak plainly about what I believe is a chronic breach of public trust and a transparency crisis that is threatening the safety and the credibility of our institutions in Ashland. Over the past year, I have received direct statements from Chief O'Mara's own Ashland police officers indicating that public safety in our own community was compromised by a board of governors, the school board. Compromised by governance failures outside of the department, failures in civic responsibility, planning, and fiduciary oversight. More disturbingly, we have learned that federal safety recommendations offered specifically to protect Ashland students in this community were denied or disregarded without community input. These were not extreme measures. These were basic modern emergency protocols, most of them fully funded through the federal or state grants and public bonds. This decision to ignore them wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a dereliction of duty. This pattern cannot continue. We are well past the point of casual concern. This is now about accountability. To that end, I am calling on this council to establish a formal annual public town hall, a forum where APD, the school board, and city officials come together before a packed public and respond to direct question from residents, one that is guaranteed with one follow-up question per speaker. We must rebuild the trust, not through messaging, but through presence, dialogue, and ownership of the consequences of neglect. And finally, I want to note that tomorrow evening I will return to address this council on the issue of proposed pay raises for public officials in the face of what I have just outlined. It's not only outrageous, it is insulting. So, I will be here tomorrow. And this is at the same time I want you to know that our school district is seeking a $10 million loan due to an internal fiscal collapse. Thank you. We cannot reward silence, secrecy, and failure with more money and more control if we want to lead a functioning city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? So Chief, when we look at the difference, and you explained that we're now collecting data in a different way than we had before, and then we've changed how we identify some of these incidences. Is that something that we can go back into the previous year's data and reconstruct so that we can see how we're comparing? Because otherwise, we have to start all the way from here. It no longer tells us a story of how well we're doing. We lose the trend line.
I think the answer is yes.
And
I think the answer is yes.
And it would be, well, I want to ask the council if the council is interested in that information, so we could reestablish the trend line using the same policies for tracking use of force so that we can look and see what the trend line is. But I also want to be mindful of what kind of time that would take. So what I'd be inclined to say is look into what it would take to reconstruct that, not going back forever, but, maybe 5 to 10 years.
Well, I think that I can get that information, but another thing that has been a part of every report is a percentage of incidents of use of force as related to the number of cases we've pulled. And we've been consistently including this. This is at the top of the second page. And even with this increase of 43 reported incidents, with the 2,571 cases we pulled, and that's not even getting into the much larger image of the 30,000 calls for service, that's less than 2% of the cases involve uses of force. And that percentage has been captured every year for the last several years and has remained in the 0.5% to this, of course, is the higher end of it, but it's still less than 2%. That has been captured and presented for several years. But I think that I can go back and accomplish what you're asking.
Is the council interested in having that data? Yes, Councilor Dan.
Yes, Mayor, I absolutely. I mean, to second what you had said about not trying to put too much work for not much return into that, I think it's critical to tell the story of what's happening there. Because, we all too often, we pull the wrong data or we just pull a segment of it. And I mean, when I was skimming the packet before I downloaded, I did the same thing. What is this spike in 2024 without context? And that can happen if we're pressed for time, anybody in the community, and we are often running with, incorrect assumptions. So that would be appreciated, I would think.
Councilor Kaplan?
I don't know if I had a different topic. I don't know if
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay? Okay. Ty, I wonder if you could respond to what Debbie was talking about, the citations on the night lawn. We talked about, I asked a question about the reduction of camping in the parks, and I think we agreed that might reflect the fact that there is now a place where people can camp without it being prohibited. But now I'm hearing from Debbie that not only are people getting citations, but they're getting I didn't get all the numbers, but twice the number of citations. That sounds like a lot much more than were on your in your report for having been cited in our parks in the previous year. So what's going on? How do we understand that?
Well, I can't account for every single instance, but what we all have to remember is that sleeping is permitted on the night lawn from 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. And outside of that, and of course there are allowances for if it's raining, the on-duty police supervisor can tell people that they can stay put. Outside of that allowance, it's no more legal to sleep out here or camp out here than it is in Lithia Park or somewhere else. And so I know that the officers have had, again, without having the ability to answer every single one of her concerns, the officers have had several instances of people who are lawfully using the night lawn between 7 p.m. and 7:30 a.m., and then they are unlawfully using it outside of that framework. And there is no allowance for being out there outside of the rules that the city has established. And my guess is that that would account for a big chunk of that enforcement action.
So I'm just trying to remember the detail of the anti-camping ordinance, which I think requires 72 hours or something, establishment. What is the detail? If somebody sets up a camp in one of the parks, are they cited immediately, or are they remind me what the process is and how somebody could run afoul of this for maybe not taking down a tent, by 7:30.
Well, let me start that answer by recognizing that fewer than 50% of Ashland police officers' enforcement actions result in enforcement action being taken. So fewer than 50% of the people that Ashland police officers catch speeding, catch pro-camping, catch drinking in public, blah, 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 less than half of those people get a ticket for it or face enforcement action. So I know that the officers are giving people ample opportunity to comply and getting compliance through education. And while I cannot say this as an absolute, my experience and my high confidence level is that the people that are getting citations are people that have been given ample opportunity to follow the rules, and still they refuse to do so. And I'm certainly not opposed to that. When I started here as a patrol sergeant and I was being trained by the senior officers and getting the lay of the land, it was made quite clear to me that every time a new unhoused person rolls into town, the consensus of the overall absolute approach from the Ashland Police Department is to recognize that it's a new person in town, make sure that they understand what the rules are, give them overwhelming opportunities to follow the rules before any enforcement action is taken. And I do believe that the vast majority of the time that is still happening.
I'd love to have some more clarity on what's actually going on there. Councilor Duquesne and I. So I appreciate that you didn't come today with that, and we didn't ask for it. But Councilor Duquesne and I did ask for a session on the night lawn, a report on the night lawn. It's been now 2 years. I'm hoping that's going to get scheduled. 2 years since we've had the night lawn.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry if I missed bringing something to council.
No, it wasn't you. We asked the city manager.
Okay.
Yeah. So we asked for it to be scheduled as soon as possible, and Councilor Duquesne is not here tonight, but she also, she was the one that actually made the request, and I seconded it. So I'm hoping that we can get that scheduled, because it seems like there's something there that we probably should dig into and see whether our night lawn is serving the purpose that it was set up for. If people are getting cited, at a higher rate than elsewhere in Ashland, it's hard to imagine that that's really what we intend.
Well, but a couple of things. First of all, the rest of the answer to your question is that the 72 hours where that came into effect was in removing a camp. And under the current ordinance, we do not have to give anybody, this is off the top of my head, but I think what Doug came up with was, if we know that a camp has been up for less than 72 hours, we do not have to post it and give them time. We can just order its immediate removal. So that's a hanger-on from before this entire conversation started.
Right.
And the other thing that I would really caution all of us to keep in mind, and I am very supportive and respectful of the work that Debbie does and the information she brings here. I don't know where her numbers are coming from, and I don't know where my numbers and her numbers are colliding to give us this seemingly disparate set of information, and I would really urge us to be cautious about assuming that that is accurate as maybe it's being perceived.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, you didn't present any numbers on this at all. It wasn't part of your report, so it's not like the numbers were conflicting. She presented numbers that were different, a different topic than what you presented. You presented on the parks. You didn't present on the night lawn. So I think it would, and to your point, this is an off-the-cuff, response to, I think, a question that was raised by one of our residents who's been working on the night lawn and providing that sort of outreach. It seems to me that we could benefit from having a deeper dive into some of this with your numbers. I would love to see your numbers and not just numbers. It's not just about numbers. It's what you're observing. What are the people? What's the human cost of it? What are we actually achieving, and how can we achieve what we want to achieve more effectively?
I'm happy to participate. Again, I really want to encourage everybody to keep in mind that the night lawn is there to allow people to sleep from 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. And other than that, except for the wiggle room that is available here and there through the weather not cooperating, other than that, that is just another piece of city-owned property, just like the front lawn of Lithia Park is, and there's no allowance for camping out there any more than there is anywhere else.
So, Councilor Hanson, did you have anything? Yep, go ahead.
So, thank you, Mayor. So my first question actually is, in looking at the data that you asked for, if you could help me understand how we're looking at apples to apples there between what we're parsing out for 2024 versus.
Well, right now it's not apples to apples.
Right. So
what I was
missed
asking the
that
chief
clarifier.
was how hard would it be to go back several years with the new policy of what identifies a use of force incident, so that we could we would have apples to apples going back some amount of time with the new policies and procedures for identifying use of force incidences.
Okay, so some
so that
kind
we
of
wouldn't have
recoding
this
or
sudden spike
something.
that all of a sudden we don't know what it's coming from. We would go back and analyze the data under that different structure, and then we would be able to compare year over year for some period of time.
Great. Yeah, and I think that will be helpful. I missed exactly how you were going to do that, but I trust that you'll, if there's something meaningful there, we'll get to it. And I think it's a great idea. I'd like to ask you just in general. I know you didn't come with the numbers that Citizen Debbie Nicewander presented, but they are curious and also alarming to me. Among the unhoused, housed, youth, adults, a number of 20 ODs and 34 suicides. That's the kind of thing I'd also like to keep track of, just for our community health and wealth. And I'm just curious if you have access to those numbers and if it's something that you are concerned about as well. I've been privy to some other communities that have had some data kind of show its ugly head before a community crisis happened, and I'm just curious where we lay in that kind of spectrum.
Sure. The overdose data, the fire department is the best gatekeeper of that information, because overdose is by definition a medical situation, not a law enforcement situation. Suicides would be more in the police department's lane. I don't have any immediate data on suicides over the last year. I just can't speak to that. I think I could bring that back in the future if that's something that the council wants me to track and bring back. I guess that seems a little bit random as a standalone thing without trying to understand what's behind it, but I'm happy to work.
I don't know either, Chief, but it just seems like that's a that's a number that's significant. The suicides and sudden deaths might be at the police lane in terms of enforcement and, our 2% use of force and all that. Aside from all of that, it's just a community safety number that I think is interesting to track. And certainly if we get into crisis mode, I'd want some kind of heads up from any kind of data that we can get. So just putting it out there, I don't know if it's a more than 10 hours type request, but it's interesting data. I appreciate you bringing it to us. It seems like those numbers are high for our little community.
Council, is there interest in seeing those numbers? I'm interested in just tracking that trend. I know there's a lot of conversation about especially addiction and overdoses and what does that look like. And I know the numbers are available countywide, but I think that I would be interested in seeing what it looks like in our community. So thoughts, Councilor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I just, I would want to, the data itself, the raw data would probably be somewhat, I don't know how we would use that. I guess I would want to be very careful that we don't attribute something to a through line that we can't really find out why or what we can do about it. Go ahead, Chief.
I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to get it to drag Debbie into this, but I know that Debbie pulls information, and if she's, just as a side note, if she's pulling CAD information and she's seeing a line item that says suicide, that doesn't mean somebody killed themselves. That means that the officers responded to a reported suicidal situation. And so we might be getting triggered by something that is misunderstood here.
Right.
Well, I think it was suicide or attempted suicide.
Okay.
But Councilor Dale?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And yeah, because that is to the extent that that's a distinction, I mean, I would assume, I'm not qualified to make that assessment, but I would want to, outside of trying to figure out what we can do about it, I just want to make sure that we are not jumping to, I just want to be very cautious on how we would potentially use that information. Suicide rates, especially about young people, have just skyrocketed nationwide. I mean, it's just, there is an endemic problem in this country, and it is across the board going up and to the right. And so, how could we, I would say, what can we do as a community? I would say, without even looking at the numbers, we know they're going up. So I just want to, I want to make sure that if there's something that would be out of the ordinary, we would want to know that relative to Ashland, but I wouldn't, I guess I would defer to you, Chief, and maybe Debbie is to just kind of find out as part of our forum of, is there any reason why, but to not jump to any reason, any answer prematurely. So short answer, I would say, yeah, I would be interested as long as it's something that can be reasonably pulled, but let's just be careful.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel similarly. I think that it's useful to have data as long as we're not trying to draw conclusions with it. I think that that's a conversation that's really outside of our purview. There's not much we can do around mental health. It certainly strengthens the conversation around Jackson County's crisis response team and how does that fit in. I think there's a policy angle there with it. And then in terms of the overdose data, I mean, I think that is, certainly it sits with AFR, but I know that we've seen data like that before when we were having conversations about Cap East for the ELIA. And kind of it was one of the reasons why there was a desire to have a Cap East is because we saw that there was an increase in overdoses happening in the Ashland Street corridor over there. So I think that could definitely be useful information to help us determine what are the best policy practices to give you tools to help mitigate those problems. So I'm interested in having that data, just maybe not trying to draw conclusions from it necessarily unless it fits within our purview.
Councilor Kaplan?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say the same thing that Councilor Bloom said about the suicide data. We did draw conclusions from the suicide data in Cap East. Chief, obviously it's not
Respectfully,
something.
that wasn't suicide, that was
Overdose. I meant to say overdose. I was talking about Councilor Bloom's comment, and I misspoke. Thank you. I meant overdoses. So I think it would be useful to have that. I think it is also indicative of distress and other things that maybe we should be looking at in our community, and maybe geo-referencing it a little bit better too would be helpful. But I recognize that this is something that comes more appropriately from AFR than the police department. But
I can
you
get-
guys can work together.
Yeah, I know where they are.
Yep.
Great. Councilor Sherrill?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. We're lucky to have you and your staff and your team here. It was a good question that was brought up by a community member. And first response, if it's not recorded, it doesn't happen. So I'm sure you have a process and an SOG for logging into computer-aided dispatch. Is there like a process if an officer can't complete a report, if they don't have a definition in there? Is it a drop box? Is it an error that some of these calls for service are coming up with no notes? And can we you've been super transparent about not all the data being perfect, and I really appreciate that. So I'm sure it's something simple that's easy to fix.
It's a work in progress that officers need to be reminded that what seems like an absolutely run-of-the-mill call to them, the officers handle about 90 calls for service a day between all of them, 30,000 plus a year. And as they're rushing to get off to the other one, they don't realize that a year later, Chief O'Mara is going to come back and look at that and try to figure it out. So yes, it's something that we can constantly do better. And I will remind them, especially maybe for ordinance complaints, that they really need to be diligent so that we can come back and suss out what the nature of the complaint was. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for the explanation. I know in fire, we would do quarterly peer reviews, and we would review everybody's charts, so we would catch up on that stuff. And I guess just follow-up question, you said you're too short of a full staff. Are those positions funded? Is there a reason they're not hired, or are we just trying to recruit?
They are funded. We have been down on staffing since 2020. A lot of law enforcement jobs, people walked away from them. We had some retirements. At one point, we were operationally down to 19 functioning police officers out of 31, and we could barely keep the patrol function going along. We've been constantly working to get back, but hiring an entry-level police officer, if I interview somebody tomorrow to have them operational on the street, it's going to be easily over a year, maybe a year and a half before they're doing solo patrol. So it's a very long ramp-up process. But we are making headway, and we're closer to being fully staffed than we have been in a long time.
Copy. Thanks for your service.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So coming back to the question about the night lawn, I know we've had a variety of different conversations about having a discussion at the council so that we can all make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what is the goal of the night lawn, or what are the goals of the night lawn, so that we're clear about expectations. Because I think in some ways that's where some of the question comes in about that. Is it a facility? Is it just a place to camp? Is it a social services program of some sort? What is our philosophy about that space? And what is the impact of that space on this campus here? And do we, if we can get to the point where we are all having or working from the same understanding, I think it will be easier to answer some of the questions about the night lawn and is it working, is it not working? And so that's something that I know that you've been having conversations with staff about, and so we can expect that to come for a discussion later this summer?
Later this summer. So we are in the process of signing an MOU with Aura to do some work on the Dusk to Dawn lawn to monitor and do outreach there. So I'll have more information about that as well when we come forward. So that will be scheduled on the look ahead, but due to this schedule, it probably won't be up until August or September.
Great, thank you. Any final questions for the chief? Great. Well, thank you, Chief O'Mara. I appreciate the data that you continue to bring to us, and also just the approach of policing. And glad to see the update, and glad to be proud of our police officers in our community. It's a great thing when the police philosophy mirrors the community's philosophy about policing, and you do a great job of leading that.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Have a good night.
Okay, we move on now to the strategic planning process and next steps.
All right. Okay. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So with the approval of the budget, we have about $80,000 for a strategic planning process for this biennium. So that money will encompass both the public engagement and the drafting of the actual document and anything else we need for this process. So I know I've been here once before requesting that we consider having a strategic planning process. But prior to moving forward with that, I wanted to have a discussion with you all about what your vision is for this, get some feedback about timeline, partners, et cetera, to make sure I'm not going down the wrong rabbit hole with it. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So just as a reminder, this process does a few things. It helps us define our goals and priorities as a community. It helps guide the allocation of resources once it's drafted, helps us think strategically about addressing some of our challenges, promoting coordination within the community and among the major institutions, and then work towards enhancing the quality of life for the community. So when we're thinking about the Ashland vision, so the strategic plan is kind of a big overarching plan. It's a long-term plan, 10 or 15 years, kind of what we're moving towards. So this plan endures multiple councils, endures multiple staff members who come and go. So this plan helps provide consistency over time with what we're working towards. So thinking about kind of where our priorities are and what areas we want to have discussions with the community and partners about, brainstorming with staff, this is kind of where we landed. And so we want to make sure we're on target for some of the discussions we want to have. So climate resilience, economic development, homeless services, and then city service levels, which includes both police, fire, and parks. What are we missing?
Councilor Bloom?
Thank you for bringing this forward. I'm sure we all have thoughts here.
I knew you would.
Yeah, exactly. And these aren't ranked in terms of priority. This is just kind of a throwing some things out there.
No, this is just kind of, I want to have a plan before we go out and have this discussion with a consultant to make sure we get the right person on board and we're headed in the right direction.
So one thing that stands out to me is I'm not seeing anything on there about transportation, and that kind of encompasses a lot of things. One of the things I would say, we've had conversations about this before, about having smart meters for utilities, and that's not really transportation, but it kind of falls under with public works. And so I would like to see something related to that. I think there is some crossover with economic development around that when we talk about trails and mountain biking. So something in that area. I haven't quite teased out what that would look like yet. When we talk about homeless services, I think that there's a way to really kind of lump that into kind of a public health and wellness conversation rather than just homelessness or homeless services. I think that can fall under that, but we can also tackle some other issues. We were just talking about suicide, for example. And then I don't see anything really about housing affordability and diversity. I know that we're limited, of course, in what a city and municipality can do, but I'm sure it's going to be top of mind for a lot of the community. And so if there's some way to kind of weave something around housing in there, I think would be helpful. And that's what I've got.
So the housing production strategy exists. So are you thinking you want feedback on that strategy, or this is a standalone discussion about housing?
So I see this as, at least from everything that I've seen that you've presented in the packet, right, is that this is kind of a big process and there's going to be a lot of community engagement. I'm seeing that a lot of these issues are going to come up. I know we have the housing production strategy, and that's an important tool, but how do we communicate that to the public when we're getting feedback, and what parts of that strategy are most supported, or is the community really wanting us to go heavier on? I mean, we've kind of have our timeline of what that looks like, but this is the first time that we're really kind of, at least as far back as I can remember, really going out as a municipality to the community and asking for feedback, for information, for ideas. And so as much information as we can capture in that, I think would be really, really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you.
So other thoughts, and then we'll come back to these because we want to give a coherent, full council response. Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And thanks for bringing this to us, Sabrina. I've got lots and lots of thoughts and trying to bring some order to it. I think the first thing is I didn't see anywhere in this what time period you're talking about. Is this a 5-year strategic plan, a 10-year strategic plan? What do you really have in mind?
Yeah, so I think it needs to be 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years, okay. So I I just needed to ask that question to get that sort of,
Yeah.
get our frame of reference on, because I think it does need to be a longer time frame like that. And I think that what's missing for me is it doesn't depart from the current vision, values, and priorities that we spent some time talking about as a council. Seems like we should build on that and use those to then identify the areas like quality of life and fiscal sustainability weren't really, I mean, it's not like they're not there, but that doesn't capture what were our vision, values, and priorities. I think like Councillor Bloom, there's some things I think city infrastructure as infrastructure needs to be on there. I think we need to be thinking about the big question, if it's a 15-year time horizon, what is the desired population? How many people do we think Ashland should have? And what sort of demographics are we looking for? A further aging population? Are we looking for a population that's got a mix of ages, things like that, and how we insert in the regional economy? I think there's a lot of big questions like that I would want to get into, because then we set the steps for how we then try to pursue those kinds of big goals. I agree with Councillor Bloom about homeless services. I think public health. I said social services and safety net, but I think that's good. I think climate resilience, I'd like to focus on fire, smoke, heat, and flood. Because otherwise, maybe there's some others. Mayor Graham is an expert on this, but I think if we're really specific with people, it focuses our mind. On economic development, I think we all talk about economic development. Again, I think we should be specific about, or at least getting the questions out there. Are we looking for jobs? Are we looking for spending? Are we looking for diversification? What are we actually looking for in terms of economic development? I talked about, you say city service levels, and you focus on parks, recreation, police, and fire, but we got utilities, and we've talked about utility strategies in the past. Obviously, we're going to eventually do a strategy for each one of our utilities, but at least starting to include some preliminary work on that in this strategic plan, I think would be appropriate. And then I think in terms of fiscal sustainability, rather than focusing in on these two things, future of food and beverage tax, city fees, I think that's certainly a discussion. But I'd want to look more broadly at what are our revenue needs as a city, and what's the incidence that we're shooting for in terms of who pays, in terms of equity. Food and beverage tax and fees are just a couple of instruments that we will evaluate based on our vision about how much money we need to bring in order to provide the service levels. And then I think I would like to see something. You talked about what community partners are we missing. I think we're missing.
Can I go through this slide? So I want to do this one at a time.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just asking quality of life. What's missing?
Yeah, I think I think you're only asking about quality of life and fiscal sustainability. So I'd say the first thing is you're missing a whole bunch of other things that are neither quality of life per se or fiscal sustainability.
Okay. Well, there's a last slide where you can throw those in there.
Okay.
So in terms of quality of life, Councillor Bloom? Did you have something?
Yeah, real quick, and I don't know where it fits in, probably on the next slide here, but organizational structure. I think we've had conversations, all of us probably had conversations at this point about is the structure of the city government really sustainable? Is it the most efficient that it can be? Is it modern? And so I think having a conversation around that. Now, how that fits in with the community, I don't necessarily know, but I'm sure the person facilitating this, the consultants, they might have thoughts, you have thoughts, we have thoughts, and including that as part of a strategic conversation.
Sure. I think, when you're thinking of structure, right? So utility billing is a good example. We allow walk-in, we allow payments of different kind, where there are utilities where you pay online or you mail a check and that's it, right? There's no interaction. I think same with fire. Do we move towards becoming a district and have a look at that? So I think there's a lot of different structure elements where we can ask the community their thoughts on really how the service is delivered that leads directly to how the organization would be organized.
Thank you.
Sabrina, can you move back one slide? Let's come to a conclusion on some feedback here. So we have a number of things that were identified. Were there any other ideas for the brainstorm? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Sabrina, I appreciate the way you've organized this. My brain's not this clear on this. The way you have it organized, I see it as the map. And so I'll do my best to try to chunk it into chunks, but excuse me if it bleeds over. So 10 to 15 years is the baseline. I wanted to know too. Wasn't clear on that. I think that when we talk about our visioning process and what we see in our community 10, 15 years, for me it's a picture. And then the established pieces that are in play right now will move around. Some will be deleted and new ones will be added. But from quality of life, I want to see where this city wants to change its operations and or use relative to our land use. I want to see what properties that we aspire to divest of and what we want to move in there. And I want our partners to participate in that as well. 10, 15 years where the university is going to look a lot different. What are we moving towards? We identified that we want to be out of B Street. I argue maybe we want to be out of this location. So, we're thinking broadly, boldly, because I don't know what it's going to look like. But in terms of climate resilience, we've talked about the grid, and we've talked about our electrical master planning. So this is now part of this. We've been corralled here, which is great. But now we need to execute what do we want our future grid to look like, and how are we going to move towards that? We're a utility. We can provide utility scale solar. There's currently still grants available to do this kind of work that could bolster our resiliency and potentially lower our rates, depending on how much electricity we could provide, or rates for low-income folks. Those are goals that are quality of life that I want on the map, and I want to be able to move towards. And then the other city services. Again, I just don't know exactly where we're going to be located 10, 15 years from now. I mean, we have beautiful facilities, but some of them are aging out, and some, we potentially need a new city hall, all that kind of stuff. That's just on this one slide. Thank you.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I would just, I guess, summarize part of, I think, what my fellow councilors are saying here with a bullet point that says growth, planning, and land use. I think the current, a housing production strategy is a solid North Star, but I'm interested in operationalizing that and figuring out how to move forward. So I think we need to relook at those, because I think what we have in the current code may be outdated, and certainly will be for the next 10 or 15 years.
Councillor Sherrill.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina, for putting this together. The quality of life, I realize these are like bullet point city focused stuff, but like family and diversity, kids, like all the things that we're losing. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I can't see a quality of life slide not mention that. And the next slide that's coming up, and a lot of the work that has already been done by departments here, make sure that we're kind of weaving in our comp plan and stuff that's already really focused on our maybe 10-year time horizon. And then a second, what Councillor Hansen says, world's changing quick. Is it worth looking at maybe a 7-year plan as opposed to a 10 and a 15, or maybe tier it? Operations as we know them probably are going to be different in the next half a decade anyways. That's just what came up for me on quality of life, the diversity of all kinds and family. Thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to a few things. So one, the way I like to do strategic plans is there's an annual check-in. So it's not like the plan is the plan and it never changes, because part of it is kind of a iterative feedback loop from both our partners, council, staff, et cetera. So to your point about timeline, yeah, maybe it is a 15-year plan that becomes a 7-year plan because things change so drastically that we need to redraft something. I think that's fair. But part of what I don't like about strategic planning is you have a plan and you never ask about it ever again. It's just the plan. That's not a really effective document for a community and a city. And the other thing, I think when we're thinking of quality of life, I think the big question is kind of what is the Ashland identity moving forward, right? And so a lot of this is, going to be kicked off with that discussion. And to your point, I think the easy route for Ashland to go is probably, into a more retirement-focused community. Our demographics are definitely leaning that way. We're seeing that impact on SOU and the school district. I think the path of least resistance is probably that way, versus working actively towards ensuring that we are a community that attracts families, that has good school districts, that people want to come to college here to keep those major institutions going. And so I think that is a conversation to have with the community that can help us figure out where we put our resources with the carrots and the sticks to make that happen within, the boundaries of where we have our jurisdiction.
So, so that we can give you some coherent body-wide feedback, I saw, in response to your question around the demographics, those have come up across, and I'm seeing a lot of head nods. So am I right in saying that we want to have that conversation about what is the makeup of our future community that we want to be working towards? Which of these pathways? Okay, so does that sound right to you as well? Yes. And so also in terms of the housing affordability and diversity, that we do have a housing production strategy, but it doesn't speak to the different types of housing that we need for our economy, for diversity, for those sorts of things. And so I also sort of saw some head nodding around the housing question, however it's designed or articulated in terms of health and wellness, maybe that larger element that picks up some things besides housing, picks up homelessness, picks up affordability in general, which is kind of also leads us to childcare and that larger affordability, accessibility conversation. Is that correct? Okay. I'm trying to make sure we know which ones are going to go on which slides. In terms of the resilience, oh, go ahead, Derek Schraub.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear. Thanks, Mayor, for a second swing at this, that we're not using resources and money to duplicate efforts. Our housing needs analysis already really identifies a lot of that stuff. I mean, if we can come together as departments and make sure that there's not duplication of effort. I mean, if we're just going to spend 80 grand to shelf some plan that we're never going to take action on, let's just use the council's goals and save the money and put it somewhere else. So I didn't want to step on your toes, but I guess my thought process was how do we not duplicate effort and kind of reach across the cubicle to see what other work's already been done, to not have to go pay for somebody else to do it again. Yeah, thank you.
Well, and I think, we've been talking about the strategic planning process now for several years. In fact, we were right on the cusp of starting one in February of 2020. Didn't happen for obvious reasons. But to really get clear as a community of where are we heading? And you're right, there's a variety of different ways that you can get to a place once you know that that's the place you're trying to get to. And this body and this community will respond to the reality of the world in terms of deciding what's the best path to try to get to that end result, depending on what's happening in the larger economy and world and whatever's happening in our community. And so the decision to move forward with strategic planning it's in the budget for that very reason, so we can get to that level of clarity, so that we can align our different resources in different towards that. And I think, Sabrina, you said it very well, the path of least resistance, the path we're on, is to become a specific type of community. We know what that is. If we're fine with that, if the community's fine with that, then that's fine. If it's not, we're going to have to do some things that are very specific. We're going to have to invest strategically to move that trajectory. And so getting clear with the community, with our partners, and with the residents about what that is I think the point of all of this. And so that's the question of what is the net that we're casting here. Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Mayor. And I think that's really helpful. I think one of the challenges we have here is at this point, I think we need to be identifying the overall goals where we want to go. And then the city has not been sitting on its hands. The housing production strategy is a really good example of that, and you mentioned that. That once we articulate that this is the goal, the housing production strategy is designed to very specifically, year after year, put into place lots of investments, lots of things to achieve those goals of a diverse housing stock of low income, middle income, ownership, rental, all those kinds of things. So we don't have to reinvent that. I think that's right, but we need to identify it, and I think more importantly, the community isn't really even aware of it, that we're pursuing that. It's too complex. It's it's a big matrix, and so I think part of the how we do this is going to be a lot of real grabbing and summarizing things that are already available, and then filling in those places where those things are not available with some new work. Does that make sense?
And then in terms of the climate resilience element here, we heard some specifics that we wanted to get covered, and just looking for head nods to see if this sounds right. We have fire, smoke, heat, and flood on the adaptation side of things, and then we have electrification and the electrical grid on the other. And those two things coming together into resilience. Does that sound right? Councilor Bloom.
Yeah, 100%. And I would just say this is where we're going to find a lot of overlap, right? When Councilor Hansen talks about the electrical grid, that's also transportation, right? That's our utility system. And so how do we, to your point, right, not duplicate efforts? We don't want to be asking the same question in 3 different spaces. And so I guess that would be feedback that I would like to have given to the consultant, is to make sure that we have a very clear, simple process laid out that we can then all look at and say, okay, yeah, that's what it is, and then go out and actually start to get the feedback from the community.
That's why we're kind of having this discussion tonight, because we want to be thoughtful about how we engage the community and ask them thoughtful questions, and also recognize that there has been a lot of work done, housing production strategy, the EOA, the budget, right? A lot of work has been done, and the majority of the community is indifferent towards us. And that's great, because they're living their lives. But this is our chance to engage with them and get their opinion on things, and let them know that these things exist, and ask for their feedback on them to make sure that we are on the right track with the vision that the community has. It's easy to get in an echo chamber as councils, as staff, and so this is our chance to think big picture, health and wellness, resiliency. But there's a lot of subcategories and questions that are going to come into each of those. And there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? So we're talking about smart meters and AMI that has a direct tie to wildfire and ability for immediate shutoff in an emergency. So a lot of these things are tied. And so having this discussion tonight is helpful for myself to have it with staff and the consultant to make sure that we're on the same page with how we want to conduct that conversation with the community. So this is helpful. Thank you.
Councilor Hansen.
Thank you. Hey, I'm curious, in the master planning process, will there be actions identified, like for instance, economic development? We as a city have not gone out and done prospecting in neighboring communities, trying to draw business into the area, but we have had conversations about it. Some of us think it's a really good idea. It would be nice to get it in the plan, so when City Manager Cotta is moved on to, some big city or something, whatever your next.
Now I'm nervous. Thanks.
All right, just kidding. But when you're not in that seat anymore, it would be nice to have that part of the action plan that 5 years down or 2 years down, we're going to go to Bend and drum up some business for Ashland. And also conversely, when we're talking about our housing production strategy and the documents around it, one of the things that I believe we're missing from those are action plans. Like, we know who owns large tracts of land in Ashland. We haven't reached out to these developers, but I just would like to put the bug in the consultant's ear that I would like to see some benchmark action plans for the city to do, so it doesn't just sit on the shelf when this council's gone and new city manager might be here.
Sure, and I think I'm going to ask you what you want out of this plan, but what I want out of this plan is action items, because discussion is nice, but having, broad action, like focus, helps me drill down into what, each department specifically is going to be working on to drive that plan forward. And that's really where we have control, right, is what the city can do. So we don't have control over the economic market. We don't have control over, individual citizens, but, we can control where the staff time and the resources that are going to push, the big goals forward. And so, I think, the large action items translate to, here is what's going to happen, kind of like the housing production strategy, this biennium, the next biennium, here are the steps. And it's not like those will go off flawlessly, I'm sure. Things come up, but at least there is a timeline and a plan for taking action.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that was brought up is transportation. Councilor Bloom brought that up earlier. Are you thinking that that's something different than the transportation system plan?
Right. Yeah, and that's the tricky, unlike the housing production, which is done, we are kind of kicking off this transportation system plan. So I guess I would look at, because again, we're looking long-term, potentially 15 years, what does the community hope to see out of the transportation system in 15 years? I don't know to what level the transportation system plan is going to get into that with community feedback, but that's what I'm hopeful to hear more of. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is the bridge over at Kestrel, right? That's been talked about, like, where that's kind of disappeared from being top of mind. Maybe the TSP is going to get into that. I don't know. But if not, those are the kind of projects that I would like the community to give feedback on, and certainly welcome ideas that people in the community have that they've seen at other communities that maybe we would be interested in.
So from a council perspective, is there interest sort of outside of the TSP in transportation at the strategic planning space? And there may be a place where the community engagement is primarily with the TSP, but we're trying to make sure that we hit these bigger topics. Councilor Bloom.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there could be, as these things are kind of happening in parallel, when we're kind of getting to the point to finalize what this plan looks like, things can get dropped off if there's redundancy. We don't have to include it in a final master plan. So there's that option too.
And I think a TSP is going to have a level of detail that's more short-term, potentially. But it also, may be more constrained to thinking about what we have now versus, just kind of a more broad, what would you like to see with transportation?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is, shutting certain streets off to vehicles. Maybe it is, so I think there's an opportunity to have a broader conversation about that. We can also, I think the TSP public engagement may be sooner than what we're looking at, but we can definitely take that information and use it.
Yeah. Councilor Hanson.
Thank you, Mary. I just had another for example. For example, if Parks and the city partnered to change the Oak Knoll Golf Course area, that would definitely impact our transportation system plan, but wouldn't be in the TSP. So if we can vision it and get it on the document, then it'll be a record for us to go back and work with, but we don't have to, I don't think, necessarily tackle what it would look like for public transportation in the Oak Knoll Golf Course area yet. We don't have to cover all the bases with our visioning for a strategic vision, but we could say if we do this, then we want that. So I can see some dovetailing there, but I think the TSP is, as city manager said, it's more pragmatic. It's more like this is happening next year and the next 4 years, I think.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So, money. Slide two. Takes money. Slide two. So fiscal sustainability, that's a big topic that we've been talking about with this budget. But really it's the talk of, the city's means versus level of service. and what we're looking at into the future. So, city staff want to give the highest level of service we possibly can, but that takes resources. And so having that conversation with the community, what are we looking at? What are we doing that people don't want anymore? What are we not doing enough of? Do we need to adjust? And then what are the resources that we need for that service level? So, we can have a conversation with the community about food and beverage tax. Of course, that conversation needs to probably happen sooner to have action around it than what's going in the strategic plan. But it is a way to have a conversation about different revenue options for general fund services. And then also looking at our regional opportunities for collaboration. So the city is going to participate in a large kind of study around fire service in the valley. So what is our hope for the future around our fire service? Is there options for collaboration with regional policing, for example? We have a very great relationship with the City of Talent and our police department. So what are some opportunities where we can think outside the box for how we provide services for this community? And then also, soon, you all will get an update about our city facilities. And they are all in fairly significant disrepair. We have no money in the budget for facility stuff this biennium. And so we need to have a conversation about divestment of certain properties, what we want in the future. Are we in the right space in the city? Are we taking up valuable economic development space we shouldn't be? Where should we be located? Where should city services be? Should we be taking up parking in this area? So that conversation is coming to council. But for the broader community who utilize services from the city, what would they like to see in a facility? And then in terms of the organization, what is the best in terms of efficiency and effectiveness and providing those services and being able to get the work done? So everything we've talked about in the vision obviously is related to fiscal sustainability. So having an element of that discussion, I think, will be important with the community because tax dollars, fees, other revenue options, all of that involves the community and our partners.
When we talk about the future of city facilities, you mentioned that it's coming back to us already. The analysis has been underway for a while. That conversation is, I'm expecting, going to happen before this bigger strategic conversation, or at least it's going to get started. So when I think about a strategy, I would typically say, well, what is our strategy? And then we would look at each of these city facilities and say, how do they line up with what we're trying to do? Are we a little bit out of step? Are we going to wait with some of these bigger facility decisions until the strategic plan is done?
So I don't think there's a need to wait because the plan that's coming forward, there's really kind of two options to move forward. And there's some divestment of property that needs to happen sooner than later. And so I don't think we're out of sync, but I think what we will want is a conversation with the public about their vision for civic buildings and what they would like to see, where it's located, what types of services do they want out of there? As we switch to, Intergov with permitting, utility billing, we're going to get new software there. We might not need as much front counter, for example. So maybe we don't need as much, public facing opportunities. So I think there's some discussion to be had around that. And our facilities assessment will help guide that discussion with the community.
Thoughts? Councilor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on what the mayor was saying relative to facilities, I guess I kind of think that way just with the financial modeling. I mean, everything that we want to do just reverse engineers back to funding and money. I mean, period. And so I wonder, and maybe this is more of a statement for a follow-up question later, but it is, I worry that, I guess let me ask in the form of a question. Similar to what the mayor was asking about facilities now, how can we get out in front of financial modeling knowing that the numbers are diverging? What I worry is that 2 years from now, we will be even that much farther behind relative to revenue expense gap. What can we do relative to this that it would be sooner rather than later as far as our financial forecasting and modeling so that we are kind of just at least keeping track. I just don't want to get hit in 27, 29 and go, well, here we are with what we're going to want to do. And the gap is so wide that we're just playing catch up and we can't action the forward-thinking stuff that we
Are you
want
talking
to
about facilities specifically?
I'm talking about
Everything?
financials, yes.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem we have is we don't have a strategic plan. So right now we're trying to fund everything. So this plan will help kind of hone in on what we want to fund. Over the next 2 years, we'll continue to right-size the workforce. We're going to come to council and ask you to divest of some property. So we're going to be taking those steps. But this plan will help focus in how we're putting resources. Because right now, we're fully funding a lot of things. And maybe we don't need to be because the community is not interested in that service anymore, but we haven't had that conversation with them. And we don't have any indicator of what, we should be focusing on.
Thank you.
Councilor Hanson?
I really appreciate that question, Councilor Dale. It's one that's, when I read this in the packet, I've been chewing on it all day. Is this the time in which we try to right-size our community for the future? And that's the big question for this body, is because I'm the visual learner. I want to put this on a map. I want to, actually form it, what it's going to look like. But really, it should be 10 years from now. What do we anticipate we're going to be able to afford? What does it look like? We have over 200 employees at the city right now, over 800 acres of parks. To this, phenomenon of the diverging lines, I believe in the worker, and we need to pay our staff, and we need to live within our means, and all those things, and the vision of our city 10, 15 years from now is going to be very different. I believe it's going to be very scaled down. Our fire department is award-winning and so expensive. And what if we need to scale that down? So, and I'm not just picking on fire because they're the most expensive, but it's just the conversation needs to be had. So the question is to you and to this body, is this where we have this conversation? Is this where we say we need to scale down our parks? Is this where we say we need to, it's going to be a very, very, I think, strenuous exercise, because we don't know what 10, 15 years is going to look like, but based on the data and the diverging lines, we've got a pretty good guess. So if that's what's happening, our fiscal sustainability part, we're going to put that in the hands of consultants. There's just a lot of magic to that.
Well, I think the consultants are here to help facilitate, right? They're not telling us what to do. So we will be driving the process. The consultants are here to assist.
But is this where we want to have this big, heavy discussion? I think it is. I think it's going to bog down everything. But that's the job.
And I think it's also true that this, in my mind, this strategic plan is a community strategic plan. It is not the city's strategic plan. And what that means is that some of these things, the city will have a direct, the city may be the actor. Utilities, it's going to be the city.
Yeah.
When we're talking about economic development, we're talking about all these other things. If we as a community have created the clear goal of where we're heading, there are all sorts of people in this town who can help us get there. So I want to be careful about backing into it by saying these are the pennies we have and what can we pay for, because there may be other resources that other people in the community will bring to bear. And I don't mean just money. I mean people willing to invest in certain things that are good for the community. But the visioning piece, I think we need to strike that balance of having an inspirational vision that we're all working towards, but not having it so far out there that none of it's attainable, right? It's so pie in the sky that it might as well not even be written down. On the other hand, you can take it, you can constrict it so much that there's no energy behind it, and no people are not going to be bringing ideas and resources to it. So I think that that's the balance in there somewhere. Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thanks, and thank you, Councillor Hanson, for bringing that up. I think that it is appropriate to have that conversation. I think that also, this is kind of going back to when I was talking about organizational structure, and I think it all ties in, right? And it's, we are asking the community, what do you want to see the future look like for Ashland? And then how do we use tools that are available to us now to kind of set ourselves up for that point, right? So that way we're not responding and trying to adapt, trying to change in the moment. But I mean, I would certainly like to see a situation where it's kind of really hitting a restart and saying, look, here's the new governmental structure, the organizational structure. Here's the number of employees we actually need. We're going to scale. Look at what is everything scaled back. What does that look like? So that way we have room in our pants to grow, right? To meet what that vision is in 10 years, as opposed to us being bloated and trying to expand and remove things and responding. I mean, I feel like that's kind of how we got to this point now. So I'm interested in that conversation, and I think that it does include the very hard decision of completely scaling back everything that we do as a city and then matching that with what the community's priorities are so that we can grow to that point.
So in terms of providing direction back to staff, the question here is, to what extent do we want to have a financial conversation during all of this? We already know that we've teed up several other financial fiscal conversations over this next year that will start with this first budget year. We did that in the budget process. We said this is where we're going to be really looking at revenue streams, different kinds of ways of bringing resources in. I would push back a bit on any notion that the city is bloated, because I've been in these budget conversations and there really isn't room to move unless we take out significant service levels. And I think that's the conversation for this. If we are doing something that the people of this town no longer care about, we should know that, because then we can withdraw from that. But what I have seen over the last 6 years that I've been involved here, and even before that, is a staff that is always scrambling to try to maintain service levels with fewer and fewer and fewer dollars and fewer people. We saw that with the parks, more acreage, fewer people, less money. And so that's the conversation that I think we need to have as a community, that says, what is it we want this community to be? And then the financial reality of that. Does the community want that enough to pay for it in the way that it would have to be paid for, or do we need to scale back that vision and right size it? And somewhere in the middle, there's probably a sweet spot where the community says that's enough of what we want, and it's what we're willing to pay or able to pay, and that's what we go with. But for in terms of this, we're already going to be taking up the future food and beverage tax, I think, separately before that. So is that something that has to be in this particular element? I just wonder, in strategic planning, I don't know how much I've seen them really dig into specific funding sources. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and it's a very valid points. And I guess to kind of refine my earlier question along the same line would be something like, because timing is critical, right? We don't have time to wait to do this, and we don't want to duplicate efforts. Would it be reasonable, I would ask this body, ask you, if those immediate financial discussions, the forecasting that we had teed up as part of our budget meetings, would then lead into and inform this, so we could kind of see what the underlying financial basis is. It would give some transparency, some visibility, some operational forward progress that then just kind of feeds into this without duplicating any efforts. I think that's what I would be interested in seeing, if that were reasonable, or does it need to be two separate things? I'm just wondering if we could use some of the information that we will be doing sooner rather than later to inform this, because the food and bev does need to be on there. All of this stuff plus more needs to be on there and will be part of it. But do you see those as two separate things, or do you?
So respectfully, I think they're out of order. So I think we need to hear from the community what they want, and then we can give them the price tag. So what we're seeing kind of with parks, for example, people are mad about splash pad hours or mad that we've reduced the trash cans, but those all come with a cost. And so what is the service level you want? And then now we will tell you the cost. And if you're not willing to bear that cost, which is reasonable, then we need to figure out a way to adjust the service level. And so I think without knowing what the community wants, it's hard to have those budget discussions because we're making assumptions based on the service level that we've always provided or have been trying to provide.
If I may. Yeah, to follow up on that then, so understood, completely understand that. However, I guess that what my response to would be that is correct if we were, and we are to some extent, let's just say starting, I don't want to say starting from scratch, but we are starting the strategic plan. I guess what I'm interested in though is I don't want to neglect that to know, to be informed at kind of a baseline of what we are, because we have services that we are providing right now, this very second. And that is what I am making sure that we are, we'll say, minding the store as we're working into this. So I guess I'm interested in, and maybe I'll just have to, the answer is we'll just
So
wait
they're
to be
just to
seen.
some extent kind of two separate things, right?
Okay.
We got to keep operating. We got to keep an
Yeah.
eye on the next biennium. We got to keep implementing the new technology and looking at the workforce, et cetera. But this planning process needs to go on because, again, we're kind of doing it without having a conversation with the community.
Okay.
So I want us to have that community conversation to help inform us as we move into the next biennium. Do we need to kind of move some things around, rethink a service level, get rid of a service, whatever. I think that will be very helpful for the budget because at the end of the day, the strategic plan is a really good resource for allocating resources, right? And so, yes, we need to keep minding the store, and that's ongoing. We need to ensure that we're able to retain and qualified employees, keep services going, because that's what we've signed on for with this biennium. But we also need to have this discussion.
Of course, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think, if we keep our focus on the strategic plan as a longer term thing, it's 10, 15 years. It's what we want, it's visioning, first of all, what we want this community to be. And then what are we gonna do in order to get there? I think some of the shorter range questions of service level and where's the money coming from is almost more, it's a different thing. It's a business plan in a sense rather than a strategic plan. It's really much more operational and very important. I'm not saying it's not, but I think that for me, the big strategic question has to do with size. If we're some of these things, are we too big? Do we have too many staff? Do we have are we bloated? I hesitate to use that word as well because I think we should be a bigger city, in which case we need a lot of the things that we've got and we need probably more of it. But if our community doesn't want to be a bigger city, then that's a kind of a turning point. That's a say, well, look, we're certainly happy to be a community of 21,000 people with a lot of the building. We've seen a lot of building housing units in this in the last couple of years, quite a few actually. But our average household, the average number of people in a household is coming down over the last, so that's a reflection of a community that's not wanting to grow or hasn't decided that it wants to grow. I don't know that there's been a specific conscious decision, but I think that's the decision we need to actually face at this point. Do we want to grow, and do we want to really be all in with some of our partners like the SOU? Do we want this to be a college town, a thriving college town with the number of people that brings in with it, with the kinds of people that brings into it, in terms of age and everything else? I think that's the fundamental, and then what other economic activities do we want to see coming here? And then if we come to some community understanding if that's what we want, then we start aligning our tools towards that. Well, how do we get there? How do we, we've got our housing production strategy, we can kind of tweak that. We've got our infrastructure, we've got, everything. And the finances, I think, will follow. As we start to, if we decide we want to be a larger community in terms of population, then you need more housing units. There's higher tax base. There's all kinds of things. There's other questions too. People can have concerns about water. People have concerns about electricity. People have concerns about all those other kinds of utilities that need to be supported if you have need to support a higher demographics. But I think that's the fundamental question, and then we go from there. So that's how I see this. I wouldn't really see putting the fiscal constraints right at the front of this, because then I think it necessarily limits our vision.
Yeah, I would see it more of a, what's your level of value for these certain things, right?
Yeah, well, and almost I think, to Councillor Kaplan's point, that first question is where are we headed, and do we have agreement, right? Because we've just had conversations here about trying to make it possible for lower income people to stay in Ashland who are here and to draw more people here. And I would say, yes, that's a generally held goal of this community, but we don't know that. We actually don't know that. We don't know that a lot of the things are generally held goals. Do we want more children in town? I say, yes, of course Ashland wants that. I have no idea that that's actually what Ashland wants. And I think that we're all here because we are talking to a lot of people and we are hearing those things. But there is real value in saying we are going there. We are going to a community. We want to be a strong college town, say. We want to have diversity of ages and income levels, right? To say it out loud, to put it right up in front of us so that this council and this community can make decisions that orient to it. So I would be hesitant to put so much into this conversation that we make that fuzzy, right? Because we spend so much time drilling really deeply into the implementation of it. But we also can't ignore the implementation piece of that, because then nothing will ever happen. So I'm wondering if we could, with the call that we put out, indicate this phased in process. That is the vision piece, which I think is often what they focus on, is the vision first, and then to spend the rest of that contract helping us pin some of the big initiatives that this council is going to do to move that forward, that build on the work that we've already done. And this council, this city has been building a lot of master plans, doing really smart planning. Can we then, once we know where we're going, say, okay, well, where are the gaps? What are the things we still need to plan for? Where should we put our focus and attention so that we do have implementation, but we haven't drilled so deeply that that we've kind of made the vision fuzzy. Does that sound right to you all? Councillor Dale?
Yeah, it absolutely does, Mayor. And I think what I was thinking, though, is I was just stewing on that, and it's probably coming up on a slide here, so I'll just leave this as a hanging question, and I know it's in the packet here, is issues with the timeline, is I don't want to go fast and be wrong. That doesn't work. But I would be interested, as I'm sure you'll discuss forthcoming, is timelines, because I think we might be able to go, maybe we might be able to accelerate that if the body chooses to do so that we can get there. I just worry about
We'll talk about why that's a bad idea.
Okay, that's fine.
So partners, everyone in the city is who we're aiming for? Oh, no.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. I think as much as possible, I think that, we want to have that diversity of opinion. And I think that what will come out of it is probably better ideas and a better vision going forward. A couple of just ideas that I had, SOU's listed, but like the local creative sector, so SOU Oregon Center for the Arts, downtown gallery co-ops, theaters. You talk about Asante is in there, but I think also Jackson County Health, mental health would be a good addition. Providence, as much as we can around that. The school district, parent teachers associations, I think are really important, as well as SU student government, to kind of give that, the quality of life priorities from student voices, young voices. Rogue Valley Mountain Biking Association, outdoor recreation groups, I think would be very important to have. And then I was also thinking, and this is kind of a little bit of a novel idea, but neighborhood associations, we don't really have those. We have the kind of South Ashland Business Neighborhood Group that started, is if there is a way to kind of isolate specific areas, neighborhoods, and get them together for focus groups to give feedback in that way, I think it would be really helpful. And then in conjunction with all of that, I think 2 to 3, probably 3 is better, large town halls that are publicly noticed meetings so that we can all be in attendance to kind of take all of these small snapshots and put them all together into one big forum where we can kind of have this feedback going back and forth from the community to us. So yeah, I try to make it quick because I know we're short on time.
Is there general interest in that type of engagement? Seems to be. Yeah.
Yep.
They often do forums. They'll have cafes and different kinds of things to gather engagement.
Yeah.
Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Councilor Bloom said. I think my only observation is that the more smaller engagement things that we do, the more expensive it tends to be. So we may run up against a budget constraint in terms of how much money we allocated towards this if we want to do a lot of community groups that are not the big town halls. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I think it's very, very valuable information, and we should try to figure out some way to do as much as we possibly can.
So one of the things I wanted to mention, I've already spoken to Dr. Hattrick and Dr. Bailey about partnering with them to some extent, because what we found with the surveys is we only get certain demographic feedback. And so I think it's really important to try and use our relationships with the university and school district to get families to respond and college-age kids to respond to this. And so I have already discussed with them my desire to do so, and having some forums at the schools, either in partnership with an event that they already have going on, so that we get the response. Not that people don't show up for us, but we're just not as thrilling as some of the school events that they have. So tagging on to some of those, I think, would be really helpful in trying to reach certain demographics, and they seem open to that, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and I think the school district is going through their own strategic planning exercise. So to the extent that we can, partner with them, to get it done together and try to align might be helpful.
Yeah, and we may find that we do kind of a joint RFP or something with them, just because they will be to some extent tied. Obviously, we have a broader scope going on, but I do think that just my experience here with the feedback we've collected before, we are kind of missing some key demographics, and we want them to participate.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think with the list that Councilor Bloom offered, that is one of the things that can be done rather than going to them for smaller events, engaging with them so that they're getting their people engaged, and coming to some of the things that we're doing that are in conjunction with other items. Councilor Hansen.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That was a great list. You had some community groups in there, Councilor Bloom. I think that would be great to bring those community groups to the table for sure. There's all these different subcategories of our community. There are community members like, there's the racing community of bikes, there's the runners, there's all the groups. Would love to see an opportunity for them to gather. I don't know what that looks like. But one of the things that you brought up, which is intriguing to me, is the notion of bringing neighborhoods together. We haven't done that so much in Ashland, but many communities have done that very intentionally. And I wonder if there's, if it's Ashland style to do that, if there is room and enough groups, geography-wise, to break up the city to help engagement. Like the South Side, the University District, put labels on these groups, and they can start acting beyond this process together, to strengthen their part of the community, whether it be through public art or whether it be through improvements to their neighborhood facilities. And I just wonder if there's, as part of this, if we want to help foster those connections and bring these groups together. So great suggestion, and I'd like to put a pin in it to see if you and staff think that it's worth developing that. So I'll just leave that there.
Councilor Kaplan?
Just a couple of other suggestions. If we're talking about, it's geographic, neighborhood kinds of things. We do have some neighborhood groups, which are the Firewise neighborhoods. There's a couple of climate groups. There's HOAs. There's Yeah,
You could
So if
organize
staff are
it.
going to do anything, we want to do
Yeah,
it by
yeah.
evacuation zones.
Yeah.
We do training at the same time, so we're probably not
So-
the best ones to pick the groups.
So the point is just trying to identify those specific neighborhood organizations that already exist that go and then take advantage of it.
So in terms of the timeline, I think that this all looks good. One of the things I would like to see in there is an implementation progress plan that comes in around the performance measures. In fact, often I've seen the implementation process included in the drafting and adoption that says, in here it says annually there'll be a check-in, but I think for something like this, we actually need to put more energy into the implementation. So what is the body that includes some city people and includes folks from our different partners
Yeah.
who are going to keep this thing moving, and maybe they come back to the whole community once a year and report on how things are going and where the opportunities are for people to engage in what's next, but that they are meeting on a much more regular basis to keep the forward momentum.
So just to speak about this one a little bit, since there was a question about timeline, the reason we want to do public engagement in fall and winter is to get families and students. So if we start that too soon, we're going to kind of miss out on those demographics. So in terms of implementation, so the way I've done it in the past and open to suggestion is while we're doing the public engagement, we ask for people who want to do, kind of the implementation stage and provide regular feedback. So we want people from major institutions and employers to do that, but also, community volunteers who then kind of work with us over the years to provide that kind of check-in. So we have a group of people we can go to and ask who have volunteered to provide that feedback for us on a regular basis. The strategic plan should involve an implementation process with phasing. But then, from that, to speak to, I think everyone's brought it up, what is a city going to do? What are the action items, right? And that's what the city is going to be focused on. And then what are the performance measures that we can track and look at and point to show that we've done the implementation and oftentimes maintained that implementation. It's not good enough just to do it and call it good if we can't maintain that level of service or whatever we're looking to implement. So, that's why I like the annual body to get together and ask, pointed kind of deep questions about what's going on that we create through this process. And they have to sign a 10-year contract. No, it's voluntary, but that is useful. It also creates accountability for the council and for staff to make the progress that we're adopting.
Right. Yeah, I think we can sort that as we get closer to it. But the elements that the city isn't going to lead on, but the city influences, I think we need to really be clear about how does that implementation work and what is the structure that keeps it moving. And then we will know what is the city's to carry out of that larger body. Okay. Councilor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and so this is probably obvious to everyone but me, but the spring, summer drafting and adoption is when we would start executing. Is that correct? Or is it after adoption, we go right into it to actually, yeah. Okay. Yeah, then to my earlier comment about timing, I just want to update that and say I'm perfectly fine with this timing. I think to your point about fall, winter and the public engagement, for me personally, I wasn't interested in a 2-year plus and then we go do something. I mean, so much changes in 12 to 18 months. This is, I like this 1 year personally. I think that's spot on.
I think, government, standard joke, we don't move quickly, but, we can start looking at what we can implement now, what phase we're in, what are we going to do the next biennium, how funding is going to change, how the organization is going to change. We can start making steps after adoption. We don't want to start making those steps if you're not going to adopt the plan. Mm-hmm.
Do you have what you need?
Yes. Done. Don't look at those. I already got those.
I think we actually hit a bunch of those as we went through, but is there anything else that anyone wants to add?
I will just say one thing about the consultant. We are more interested in finding a local consultant to potentially work with us than one of the bigger firms. So we're coming up with a process for the RFP for that. I think it will be useful for us to have someone who is familiar with the area. So we'll see how successful we are with that.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, just quick comment on that, as I would love to have somebody local, but really what I would be interested in is who comes in at the most affordable so that we can stretch those dollars out to do more of the community engagement, because that's what it's really all about, right? I mean, I think that there are larger firms out there that could do it affordably, and then that gives us a lot more wiggle room with the rest of the budget.
We don't need the consultant to do all of the public engagement either. So city staff can do a lot of that. I think what we need the consultant for is capacity in drafting and, taking all of this information and digesting it. In terms of holding public engagement, I think you have some fairly strong staff members that can do that and have done it. So I think that will help stretch those dollars and allow for some more public engagement than we would normally have.
Yeah, and I think that's
So you have
right.
staff that will, no, I'm just kidding.
But we also need to be prepared to really engage heavily in this. Councilor Hanson?
This little trip that we're about to embark on, it reminds me of my grandfather giving me advice for international travel. He would say, take half of the things that you've packed in your suitcase and leave them behind because you're never going to need them, and take the money that you have and double it because you're going to need more. We've got a lot of stuff in this suitcase and not a lot of money. So $80,000 is not a lot to accomplish everything that we need to. So we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and do something, because we're not going to get far on that, I don't think. But you have us.
I do, thank you.
Councilor Sherrill?
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to kind of say really quickly, thanks. I wouldn't want to have your job. I appreciate your service.
Okay.
And if we can focus a little bit on social media right now and get the ball rolling when we have big questions to ask the community, I mean, we can reach thousands of people for free. Obviously, we have to mine that data and we have to get what we want, but I can almost guarantee you that 95% of our community is here. How many percent of our community is there? So it's just a free, easy option. We're already doing it. If we put a little bit more time and effort into it, when we really start asking good questions, it might be a good avenue to explore and maybe throw a little bit more resource at. That's all.
All right. Any final thoughts? All right. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Meeting is adjourned.